The story begins with a man named Frank Vega, a Vietnam War veteran who once dreamed of a simple, peaceful life. But life had other plans. Frank grew up in a quiet California town, helping his parents on their small farm. He wasn't rich, but he had love, purpose, and a girl named Lindsay, the one he planned to marry someday. They were inseparable, young, in love, and hopeful. But then the war came, so Frank enlisted. He told Lindsay he'd be back soon. Only soon turned into years. In Vietnam, Frank saw things no man should. He was captured, tortured, and left scarred, both inside and out. But he survived. Somehow, he always did. When the war finally ended, Frank came home, only to find that home wasn't waiting for him anymore. Lindsay had married someone else and started a family, and the world he'd fought for didn't have a place for him. He tried everything: the police force, odd jobs, anything to feel useful again. But every door closed in his face. "Sorry, Mr. Vega," they said. "We're looking for someone younger." So Frank started selling hot dogs on the street, day after day, year after year. And before he knew it, 40 years had passed. His beard had turned gray, his dreams had faded, and the world had moved on. But all of that changed one ordinary afternoon. Frank was riding the bus. Same route, same seat. Two young thugs got on and started harassing an elderly man, calling him names, trying to pick a fight. Frank tried to ignore it at first, but then the old soldier in him couldn't stay quiet. He stood up and told them to back off. They laughed. "What's the old man gonna do?" they sneered. So Frank showed them. With a few solid punches and years of pent-up rage, he dropped them both flat. The bus went silent, except for the sound of someone's phone camera recording. That video hit the internet within hours. And just like that, the world met badass. Frank Vega, the old veteran who stood up for what was right, became an overnight legend. His face was on t-shirts, his story was everywhere, and the people who once ignored him now treated him like a hero. Even the cops wanted to ride along with him for fun. For the first time in decades, Frank smiled again. His mother, Juanita, was proud. His neighborhood finally respected him. It felt like his life was turning around, but fate wasn't done with him yet. 3 months later, Juanita passed away. Frank buried the only person who'd ever truly believed in him. He inherited her old house, and with it, her dog. For a while, that empty house was all he had left. Then came a knock on the door. It was Klondike, Washington, Frank's best friend from Vietnam, the one who'd once saved his life. They hadn't seen each other in years, but Klondike needed a place to stay. Frank welcomed him in without a second thought. Over whiskey and old war stories, they laughed about the past, two broken soldiers who'd somehow made it home. Klondike thanked Frank for everything and handed him a small flash drive. He said it was important, told him to keep it safe. Frank didn't ask questions. He never thought something that small could change everything. That night, Klondike went out for cigarettes. He never came back. A few hours later, Frank got the call. His best friend had been found dead in an alley, shot. No suspects, no answers. At the funeral, Frank stood alone, watching the casket lower into the ground, another piece of his past gone forever. The police called it random violence, but Frank knew better, so he decided to find out what really happened. He started where Klondike died, walking the alley with a veteran's patience. There, he found 3 things: a spent shell casing, a broken chain, and a pendant with a woman's photo inside. Clues, small, but enough to start a war. He took the bullet to a gun shop. The owner told him it came from a high-grade government weapon, something not found on the street. Then he pointed the photo and said, "I know that girl. She's married to a guy named Terrence. You can find him a few blocks down." So Frank went looking. Terrence wasn't home, but his wife was tired, angry, with a baby on her hip. She said her husband had been gone for weeks, probably out playing ball with his buddies. So Frank went to the basketball courts. There, he found a group of tough guys, Terrence's crew. They laughed in his face when he asked questions, but they stopped laughing when the old man threw the first punch. A few seconds later, they were all on the ground, terrified. One of them gasped out a name: Ronaldo, the guy who'd know where to find Terrence. So Frank tracked him down next. He found Ronaldo at a shady bar on the edge of town. The place was crawling with lowlifes who didn't take kindly to strangers. But when Frank Vega walked in, all he saw were men who'd never been hit by someone like him before. A brawl broke out, chairs flying, bottles shattering, until Frank slammed Ronaldo against the wall and demanded answers. Ronaldo cracked fast. He said Terrence was shacked up with his girlfriend, a woman named Tatiana, who worked at a nearby massage parlor. Frank thanked him and left the place in ruins. That night, the city lights blurred behind him as he drove home. He wasn't just chasing a killer anymore. He was chasing justice for Klondike Klondike for himself, for every man who came back from war and got forgotten. But he had no idea the people behind this weren't just street thugs. They were powerful, connected, and they were already watching him. Later that night, Frank stood outside the massage parlor, watching from across the street. Neon lights flickered over the windows, hiding more than they revealed. Inside, men came and went, the kind of place where money talked and trouble followed. Frank walked in, calm but alert. Behind the counter stood Tatiana, blonde, poised, pretending not to notice the stranger's military posture. Frank told her he was looking for a man named Terrence. The second she heard the name, her smile vanished. "I don't know any Terrence," she said quickly, but her eyes told a different story. Frank left, or at least that's what she thought. Outside, he waited. Hours passed until she finally locked up and headed home. Frank followed quietly through the back alleys, moving like a soldier again. When she entered her apartment, Frank slipped around to the rear. The back door was open just like the neighbor had said. Inside, he found her with Terrence in bed. Before Terrence could grab the gun from the nightstand, Frank was on him. He slammed him into the kitchen counter, grabbed his arm, and shoved his hand straight into the garbage disposal. The sound was brutal, the scream even worse. "Who killed Klondike?" Frank growled. Terrence broke almost instantly. Between gasps of pain, he muttered two names, Sebastian and Buster. Then one more, Panther. That was the name Frank needed. Panther wasn't just a street thug, he was a kingpin. And if Panther wanted Klondike dead, then that flash drive Frank was holding on to meant something huge. Frank left the place wrecked, blood on the tiles, and one message on the counter. "Your wife says hi." The next day, Frank tried to make sense of it all. That's when his neighbor Amber Lamps knocked on his door. She was shaken. Her husband had hit her again. Frank saw the bruises, the fear in her eyes, and something inside him snapped. He threw the man out, literally, and when the dust settled, Amber thanked him with tears in her eyes. Over time, the two grew closer. She cooked dinner for him one evening, setting up a small table in her garden under the dim light of hanging bulbs. It was quiet, just the sound of crickets and her son, Martin, laughing from the porch. For the first time in years, Frank felt human again. But even as they laughed, he couldn't shake the war in his head. Every smile came with a flash of fire and smoke. Every silence felt like the calm before a fight. So, the next morning, he met with Officer Malark, his old police friend, and handed him the flash drive. "Just in case something happens to me," Frank said. Malark looked concerned, but Frank was already gone. He wasn't looking for permission. He was looking for justice. Later that night, Frank went to church. He sat in the back pew, staring at the candles. When the priest asked what he wanted to confess, Frank said quietly, "Forgive me, Father, for what I'm about to do." And then he went hunting. Frank tracked Panther to an old industrial garage on the edge of town, the kind of place where bad deals and bodies both disappeared. Two guards stood outside. They didn't last long. Inside, the air was thick with oil and sweat. Panther waited, a tall, scarred man with cold eyes and a voice like gravel. "You've been making a lot of noise, old man," he said. Frank didn't flinch. "You killed my friend." Panther smirked. "Your friend stole something that didn't belong to him. I just cleaned up the mess." Then his men grabbed Frank. They tied him to a metal chair, hooked him up to an electric rig, the same kind of torture Frank endured in Vietnam. The current hit him hard. His body shook. His teeth clenched, but his eyes stayed cold. Panther leaned in, whispering, "Where's the flash drive?" Frank just stared back and said, "Go to hell." So Panther left his men to finish the job and went looking for Amber. As soon as they were gone, Frank looked down at the matchbook Amber had given him during dinner. He flicked it open, sparked a flame, and dropped it into a leaking drum of gasoline. The explosion tore through the warehouse. Frank broke free, fighting through the smoke, throwing punches like he was 20 again. Bodies hit the floor. Fire lit the walls. When it was over, the building was an inferno, and Panther was running. He hijacked a city bus, forcing the driver out. Frank stumbled outside, covered in soot, just in time to see the bus roar down the street. Another bus pulled up beside him. The driver stared, then grinned. "You're the badass, right?" Frank nodded. "Take it," the driver said. "Go kick his ass." So he did. The chase tore through the city, two buses crashing through traffic, horns blaring, cars spinning out of the way. Frank was relentless. At the last second, Panther swerved into an intersection and got hit head-on by a speeding train. The impact was massive. Both vehicles exploded into chaos, but somehow both men survived. Panther limped away, heading straight for Amber's house. Frank followed, dragging himself through the wreckage. By the time he got there, Panther was already inside. He held Amber at knife point, screaming for the flash drive. But Frank didn't hesitate. He burst through the door, grabbed Panther, and slammed him into the wall. The fight spilled into the yard. Fists, blood, and fury. Panther was bigger, younger, stronger. But Frank had something he didn't: purpose. When Panther knocked him down, Amber leapt on the thug's back, buying Frank a split second, just enough time to get up and land one final blow. Panther hit the ground and didn't move again. Frank stood over him, breathing hard. "Never had a woman rescue me before," he said with a bloody grin. The next morning, the story was everywhere. The mayor's corruption, the secret land deal, the flash drive, all of it exposed. Panther was arrested, and so was Mayor Williams. Frank Vega, the badass, had not only avenged his friend, he'd cleaned up his city. The police honored him with a badge. Officer Vega, at last. And that night, Frank sat with Amber and little Martin at the dinner table, finally at peace. He looked up, smiled, and said, "You know, I think this might be the best day of my life." Amber laughed. Martin nodded. And for once, Frank Vega, the forgotten veteran, the viral hero, the man who never quit, finally had what he'd been fighting for all along: a home, a family, and peace.